Today, I am excited to sit down with Stacy Blackman Consulting's Director of Test Prep, Anthony Ritz. We are going to talk all things test prep, GMAT, and GRE. Welcome, Anthony.
Oh, thank you for having me, Stacy. I love coming on the podcast and talking to you about test prep and talking to all the students out there. And as director of test prep, I work with students who come to me a lot of times after their own attempts at studying have gone horribly, horribly wrong. And so one thing I've seen a lot is every manner of study fail. And when these students come in, I always wish I could go back in time and meet them earlier and save them from a lot of wasted effort and struggle. So I thought today that I could share some of those mistakes in the hopes that those of you who still have the studying ahead of you can actually do your studying right.
Yes, this is your chance to catch them before the fails, and we're giving warnings and flagging all the pitfalls that you see. So let's start with the biggest mistake that you see in your students. What would you say that is?
Yeah, maybe the biggest and most, you know, important fundamental mistake that students make is they just start studying way too late. I get these calls from students and it's 2 weeks before their test date or application deadline, and they're just getting started on their test and they're like, I guess I need to take the test. Should I study for it? And it's crazy to me, but we do sometimes get students who come in with these sort of timelines, and there's just so little I can do for somebody at that point. Given a couple of weeks, you can maybe review a practice test, grab some low-hanging fruit, but that's about it.
So, what is the recommended timeline?
Well, a typical prep timeline for these tests is something like 2 to 3 months of studying an average of 2 to 3 hours per day. And a few students may be able to prepare a bit faster, but then again, some students will take longer, as is the nature of averages. And no matter how long you think you need, you probably want to add some extra time as a cushion because it usually takes longer than you expect. And so, that goes for your self-study, but also if you're thinking about working with a tutor at some point, even if you've self-studied for a long time, try to reach out to the tutor at least a month, ideally 2 or 3 months in advance, so that we have time to do that prep correctly.
Well, why do you think that people delay studying for something that's so critical to the application process?
That's a great question, and I think there are a lot of different reasons why someone might delay studying for these tests. And look, plenty of them are totally legitimate. There are other things that are important in life. No one is saying that these tests are the most important thing in the world, but there are also a couple reasons that really do qualify as study fails. And one of them is that some students simply get too confused and don't know where to start. And other students may have been told where to start, but they're too intimidated to actually do it.
So here we are, beginning a process. Someone wants to get a jump start early. How do you recommend they kick this off and get started?
Well, I think for a lot of students, the first decision is whether you want to take the GMAT or the GRE. And that's a whole topic all of its own. But in brief, it really comes down to which test plays better to your strengths. It's not about what feels quote unquote easier because both tests are scored on a curve. Um, but if you're not sure, you could discuss with a tutor or just look over some sample material from each test and see which question types suit you best. But let's suppose, put that to the side, that you've chosen your test. Then you may want to spend a little bit of time looking over the format and materials and just familiarizing yourself with what you're up against. And for either test, the official guide is really useful in this regard and well worth purchasing. But then the other big thing you need to do to get started is you need to take an official practice test. You need a baseline and an honest assessment of where you need work. And there's just no substitute for an official practice test taken under testing conditions to get that. And once you have that, you can go over your mistakes either on your own or with a tutor and plot out the path of your studying over the weeks and months ahead. Incidentally, this brings me to the other reason some students just don't start. They get intimidated by the idea of all that studying, or more often by the idea of even taking the first practice test. They're willing to work hard, but they're afraid of failure and how they imagine they might be judged, even just by themselves, if that first test doesn't go well. And a lot of these students decide, okay, I'll just keep looking at the material until I feel ready for a practice test. But they don't have any structure or direction in the looking without a practice test result. So they just kind of look over the material aimlessly and often not really enough without a lot of direction. And so they don't really make much progress with it. And so they don't really feel any more ready for a practice test. And so they don't get any more structure. And the loop just continues and they're stuck. So, I understand feeling a bit intimidated to go into practice test cold. It's fine to set aside a week, maybe two, to review beforehand, but set a firm deadline. And then, whether you feel totally ready or not, just take the practice test. It's not your destiny, it's just a starting point, but you need that information.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, the class, we struggle with procrastination till we die, basically.
For
And
sure.
I think that, what I've learned is procrastination is not laziness. It's really fear. It's fear of taking that step and getting started is the hardest part. So,
Absolutely.
listen to Anthony, not to your ego telling you to do things in a different way. You just got to take the plunge. All right. So, a student is locked in. They've started. What other mistakes do you see in a process?
Well, congratulations on getting over the initial hump and actually studying for the test, but there are still more study fails along the road ahead. And one of the biggest is that a lot of students just flatly study for these tests wrong. Uh, and one of the things that can happen in this regard is I see the student who just does, piles and piles of assorted test questions, one after another, with no specific focus at all. A set of 20 random questions, another set of 20 random questions, and so forth. I actually see these students a lot because after months of that, they come to us for tutoring going, ah, man, I studied and studied and didn't improve at all. So now I need help. And I suppose I should thank them for keeping me in business, but honestly, I just feel really bad for them. They've wasted so much effort. And the reality is that assorted practice is a terrible way to learn, especially if you're knocking the questions out in time sets and you're not really doing a lot of review of each question as you go.
So, what's a better approach?
Yeah. I actually think a lot of students don't even realize there is an alternative. But the key here is targeted practice. What you want to do is identify a single narrow area in which you need improvement. Say, exponent equations involving addition, or roll of boldface portion critical reasoning questions. Then review the rules and strategies for that area, you know, and practice just that topic and try to see how the strategies you learned apply. After a while, if you're doing this right, the questions should start to feel almost repetitive. Oh, this is the same thing I did a little while ago. Oh, I've seen this twist before. Oh, yeah, this is where I use that approach. And that's how you actually make progress. You get mastery through sustained, purposeful practice in one narrow area, and then you move on and repeat the process somewhere else.
Good advice for life in general. I'm seeing parallels between test prep and life. So, okay, well, let's continue on with other pitfalls. What else are you seeing?
Well, a related study fail that I'll see a lot is that students will just start out doing questions timed, 2 minutes per question, back to back to back. They'll knock out 10 or something, whether on the same topic or different, and then check all the answers and quickly review what they got wrong. And they'll see the right answer, maybe glance quickly at a solution. They'll nod sagely and they'll go, "Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, got it. No, I understand. I see what I did there." And then they'll move on. And even if you're doing targeted practice, if you do it like that, you won't get much out of it. What you really need to do, at least at the beginning of studying a topic, is to slow down, do the questions one at a time, and review after each one. And that review isn't just what was the answer? Oh, I see. It was supposed to be that one, and then move on. It's, well, how was my process? Did my approach to the solution utilize any of the strategies I've studied? Did it line up with any of the other solutions that other people have gotten to this? And by the way, if you're looking for those, a couple sites, GMAT Club and sister site GRE Prep Club, are a great way of looking at other people's solutions. You can go in the forums, you can find basically all of these questions there and see what other people are doing to solve them. And, so if it's not lining up with that, or if you struggled or you got it wrong, then you have to ask, well, okay, why did I struggle? Why wasn't I able to use those strategies and get that solution? And don't just ask one time, dig deeper. Okay, fine. Why didn't you get that solution? Well, you just didn't see it. Oh, okay, fine. Why not? I was just a careless error. Okay, but why was it a careless error? Why did you make that silly mistake? What could you do differently next time to make sure that you won't make that mistake again? And what can you take away from this question that will help you on a similar but different question in the same topic? So take your time with this. Go deeper. Ask the why question one more time than you might otherwise do. And if that sounds like a lot, yeah, it is. And when you're doing this right, you're not spending 2 minutes on a question. You're spending maybe 10 to 15 minutes digging into it, either on your own or with a tutor, and really exploring what you can improve. And then you're taking everything you just learned and applying it to the next question. And that is how real progress happens.
Great advice. Love that structure.
Awesome.
Um,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, well, I was going to ask about practice tests because I know that that's a great tool that everyone studying for these tests should utilize. But how do you suggest they leverage the tests available to them?
If I may, but before we move on too much, I'd love to talk about practice tests, but I do want to say another word or two about, sort of what real progress looks like here,
Yeah,
because I think that another sort of fail that I see from a lot of students is that because progress isn't always linear and it's not always immediately visible at the level of right and wrong answers, a lot of students will get frustrated and abandon all the good things they're doing if they don't immediately see the results they want. So I do want to let people know that these tests are really hard, and you may have to do half a dozen or more different things right on a single question to get the right answer. And as you're progressing in your studying, you may go from doing, one of those half a dozen things right to doing two or three or four, but you're still getting the answer wrong because you have to get all of them and you're not. And it doesn't feel like progress. But the thing is, one day you're going to get the final piece into place, and suddenly you're getting it right. It's like you woke up that morning and it's just magic. And it doesn't feel linear, it feels abrupt, but it's really the result of all that gradual, invisible progress. And by the way, if you're struggling here, this is a place that a tutor can be really helpful. If you're feeling frustrated or stuck and you're not sure whether you're doing the right things and making real progress, someone like me can kind of get underneath your process a little and see what's really going on and identify whether you need to make changes or whether if you just stay the course and keep dropping things into place step by step, it's going to one day all click together.
love that. Yeah, I mean, as with anything in life, it's not linear. Like, and that's so hard. You have to like keep on plugging along, even when you're not sure if it's making a difference, and then have faith one day it clicks. So, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for that.
But
Um,
you asked about test
yeah.
materials, and I think that's also a great question. So let me take that one at this point. And I think practice tests are really important. I've said that, but there are also fails that students have in just even how they choose the tests that they do. And sometimes students come to me and I ask them to take a practice test, and they say, "I've already done them all." Like, excuse me? You did all six official GMAT practice tests? And you can reset the four paid ones one time without repeating any questions. So you really have 10, right? Oh, you did that. Oh, okay, I guess we can use a company test. It's not ideal, but it's better than wait, what? You've done those too? Which companies? All of them? And I get these students, and it's their entire study plan was just to take a practice test every other day for like months until they, I guess, got a score that they liked.
That's dedication. I mean, why is that not your recommended approach?
Well, there are just two massive problems with this plan. And I think the number one is it doesn't work. Practice tests are great for identifying your weaknesses, for tracking your progress, for working on pacing or test day mindset. But they're a terrible way to actually improve your mastery of any particular content because they're not that sort of targeted and purposeful practice we were talking about earlier. So for whatever test you're taking, it's not actually going to help you improve that much just to take a bunch of practice tests. And then the other huge problem with this is that the practice tests are, especially the official ones, which I recommend, especially for the GRE, they're an extremely limited and valuable resource. There are 5 for the GRE. Even with resets, there are 10 for the GMAT. And when you run out, they're gone. If you burn through them all prematurely, then when you need them later for that tracking and identifying on the weaknesses or even just practicing the test day mindset, when you need them at that point, you're not really going to have them. And don't do that. You put yourself in a very bad spot.
Don't do that. Okay. Um, so how to proceed with the practice tests?
Well, so another thing that we see with practice tests is that some students like to use the company written lessons to prep, and in addition to the practice tests, and that's fine, um, but it's not a substitute for seeing official questions and practice tests. So I think that the best companies understand this and use the materials to supplement the official stuff. But especially if you end up with a test prep company that isn't as good, or again, that's a topic for another day. I won't get into that. Or if you use a company materials exclusively, you may be in for a bit of a shock when you finally see the official test and you realize there are subtle but important differences in difficulty wording or just how airtight the logic of the answers actually is.
Okay, great. So even using those practice tests, there is a strategy to that and a structure and
Yeah.
methodology rather than just throwing it all at the wall.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah,
I'll just say that you kind of want to have a cycle of, take a practice test, evaluate where you need work, and then go into that targeted practice like I talked about, master all those areas that you're struggling with, and then some weeks or maybe a month later, take another practice test, see how you've progressed, identify new areas, and sort of repeat the process.
okay. So let's assume you've dodged all of the traps that we've mentioned. You've studied and you've mastered some of the topics. So now you're in the clear, correct?
Well, not so fast. Unfortunately,
Okay.
there's still other study fails, and another one that pops up way too often is that a student will have that mindset. They will learn a topic and maybe even get to pretty good mastery of it, and then they'll move on, but then they'll just ignore it for weeks or even months as they study other parts of the test because this is a long, probably multi-month process. And when they finally get back to it, maybe even in the testing center, or on a practice test or whatever, then they come to the painful realization that they've forgotten pretty much everything they learned. And as I said, it's a big, long process. If you ignore something for a long time, your skills will slip. And it's really easy to make this mistake and end up playing whack-a-mole and never really get anywhere. You spend 80% of your study time on whatever new topic you're focusing on at the moment. But the other 20%, you need to spend that on sort of general cumulative review. Even after you've mastered a topic, mix in a question or two on that subject every week. Just make sure you don't lose it. And it's a simple tweak, but it does a lot to get you to the end of the process with all of that progress intact. Incidentally, this is when the assorted timed question sets actually do make sense. Because if you have true mastery, you should be able to perform while you're on the clock. And then the mixed sets force you to work on correctly identifying each question type as well. And that's also an important skill to master. So once you've got to the point where you've, sort of nailed down the topic, that can go into the mixed question set and be a part of that.
Excellent. So, lots of pitfalls to avoid in this process. Are there any final ones that you want to warn students about?
Yeah, before we go, I do have one final fail that I'd like to mention today. And it's not technically a study fail, but it is important nevertheless. And that is, don't ignore the mental side of taking these tests. Mental state is really important. And if you walk into a testing center unprepared for that side of things, it can really bite you. Note, by the way, that this includes sleeping and eating well before your test and all of that stuff. And look, some degree of nervousness or jitters is totally natural. But if you find that you're struggling with severe anxiety, if you could do the questions just fine in practice sessions, but your mind goes totally blank every time you sit for a practice test, or if your GMAT score drops 100 points or more every time you try to go from a practice test to the real thing, you should address that. And we actually have a performance coach we sometimes refer students to for exactly this reason. It's not for every student or even most, but for the ones who need that, it can make a huge difference. So if that's you, don't ignore it. And don't think you can necessarily power through it or just make it go away by mastering and memorizing how to do every single question, because these tests are adaptive. And so they will always find something that's hard for you. And if they haven't found it yet, they'll just get harder. That's the nature of adaptive tests. So the question isn't whether you can make everything easy and memorize how to do all the questions that you could possibly get asked perfectly. The question is whether you're mentally prepared and equipped to handle it when things get hard.
Love that. Yeah. I mean, from testing through to submitting your application, it's a, a, an intense process. It's stressful. We have to take care of ourselves. And I love that you mentioned that. I also just want to say that Anthony is the test prep guru. He is the one that we on the SBC team trust to help even our own children, and he has worked miracles for them. Like it's crazy. So
Oh, that's
if
very
you
kind.
are in the market for a tutor, this is the GOAT. This is the GOAT test prep tutor that I am talking to right now. So, thank you for your time, Anthony. I know that these tips will be so helpful for all listening. And I just really hope that all the future test takers heed your advice. It's hard earned through many years of test prep and dealing with test takers.
Well, I hope so too. I really want students to succeed on these tests, and if something I said here makes a difference, I'd be very, very happy. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast, Stacy.
Thank you, Anthony.